Welcome to the UPSC News Analysis for June 18th, 2025. Great to have you with us again. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources today. We're covering quite a range: Supreme Court rulings, some big labor law reforms, the global impact of AI, shifts in nuclear strategy, and, some really crucial social policies. Our mission, as always, is to help you cut through all the noise. We want you to understand every core concept, get a grip on the key current affairs, and really see that bigger picture. We'll look at what it all means for policy, society, governance, basically tailored to help you connect those dots for your UPSC preparation. Think of it as, well, a shortcut to being truly well-informed, giving you those aha moments.
Exactly. We'll be pulling out those essential nuggets of knowledge, connecting things that might seem separate at first glance, and exploring not just what happened, but more importantly, why it matters in the broader context. We really encourage you, as you listen, to consider the different viewpoints and implications.
Okay, let's dive right in then. We're kicking off with a really interesting case from the Supreme Court. It highlights that critical balance between freedom of expression and, well, public order. So, the Supreme Court recently stepped in regarding Kamal Hassan's film Thug Life. It told the Karnataka government to make sure the film, which is already CBFC certified, gets screened. This happened because there were protests about some comments Hassan supposedly made during promotion comments some groups found offensive.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how this case really puts fundamental principles into sharp focus.
Yeah.
We're talking about freedom of expression, that's your constitutional right under Article 19.1.
Yeah.
And then there's the rule of law, which is, well, the bedrock of democracy, right? It means
Yeah.
laws govern not just arbitrary actions or mob threats. The Supreme Court was pretty clear. Once a film has that mandatory CBFC certification, threats or violent protests just can't be allowed to stop its lawful release, period.
Right. So this isn't really just about one movie then, is it? It seems to shine a light on some deeper societal tension.
Well, absolutely. This really spotlights that escalating tension between individual liberties and, frankly, mob rule. It forces us to ask, are we truly upholding constitutional principles? Or are we letting fear and identity politics dictate things? The key insight here is how quickly the rule of law can erode if the state machinery fails to protect basic rights. This creates fear among artists, obviously, but it also undermines the state's core duty. For the mains exam, this flags challenges to free expression from mob pressure, state failure, the rise of identity politics. The way forward: well, strengthening institutional protection, making states act proactively against threats, and maybe promoting media literacy. Grievances need legal channels, not streets.
That case definitely highlights a constant tension. Okay, speaking of fundamental conditions, let's shift gears to a proposed change affecting potentially millions of workers right here in Karnataka.
Yeah, the Karnataka government is looking at amending its Shops and Commercial Establishments Act. The proposal could push daily working hours up from 9 to 10. The weekly limit stays at 48 hours, but here's the real kicker. The overtime cap might jump from 50 hours to a massive 144 hours over 3 months.
Right. So the Karnataka Shops and Commercial Establishments Act of 1961, that's basically the rule book for working conditions in many businesses there. And this proposed change is not happening in isolation. It actually aligns with the union government's bigger push for labor law reform. The 4 labor codes aimed at simplifying 29 older laws. The goal is more economic flexibility, easier business.
Okay, so what's the real impact likely to be? For workers, for businesses, for the state's economy overall? Well, it's complex. There are opportunities, definitely, but also significant challenges. On one hand, businesses argue it could boost productivity and make Karnataka more attractive for investment, especially in IT and services where demand fluctuates. But the flip side, and it's a big one, is the real worry about worker fatigue, potential exploitation with longer hours. And you're already seeing backlash from trade unions. This could deepen labor discontent, impacting society. For UPSC, this hits that balance ease of doing business versus workers' rights. Ethical questions about the employer-employee relationship, too. The way forward really has to involve tripartite consultations. Get the state, employers, and trade unions talking before finalizing things. And crucially, safeguards like health checks, compensatory leaving, those need to be solid.
Speaking of work, let's pivot to something that's rapidly reshaping it: artificial intelligence. And Karnataka is, again, taking initiative here.
That's right. Karnataka's Department of Electronics, IT, and Biotechnology has launched a study specifically to assess AI's impact on its workforce. This ties directly into their upcoming IT policy for 2025 and their skilling efforts under Ninai Puna, Karnataka. Makes sense, given Bengaluru ranks, 5th globally for AI and big data ecosystems?
Exactly. Artificial intelligence, we hear about it constantly, but it's fundamentally changing the workforce. Karnataka's study is trying to get a handle on how these technologies, the ones mimicking human learning, will actually impact jobs, skills, livelihoods. Minna Puna Karnataka, for instance, that's the state's big program for getting its workforce ready for these new tech demands.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. If you're a worker, maybe in a more traditional role, what's the first thing you should be thinking about or doing right now? Is it really just about learning to code, or is it broader?
That's a really crucial question. And I think it's less about everyone suddenly needing to become a coder and more about strengthening general AI literacy and adaptable skills. Problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, those become even more valuable. The challenge you see is this whole debate, job displacement versus job creation. Some jobs will go, yes, but new ones demanding different skills will pop up. But there's also the risk of a widening digital divide, right? So the way forward, definitely robust skilling like an ABUNA. But also multi-stakeholder consultations to shape policy, building responsible, inclusive AI frameworks, addressing things like algorithmic bias, privacy, regular impact assessments will be key.
From the future of jobs, let's check the current state of our wallets. Let's talk inflation. We've had some good news, but there seems to be a lot of uncertainty still swirling around.
Yeah, we saw a pretty welcome drop in retail inflation. It's the CPI down to 2.8% in May 2025. That's actually a 75-month low. And wholesale inflation, the WPI, also slowed right down to 0.4%, mostly thanks to lower food and crude oil prices.
Yeah.
The RBI has even shifted to a neutral stance now, giving them some breathing room.
Right. CPI tracks prices from your perspective, the consumer. WPI looks at the wholesale level. And what's really crucial to grasp is how much global crude oil prices influence everything. And that Strait of Hormuz, it's a major choke point for oil supply, extremely vulnerable to geopolitical stuff.
So, yeah, despite these good numbers, why is there still so much uncertainty? What are the main worries?
Well, the uncertainty comes from some very real risks that could just flip the trend. Look at the Israel-Iran tensions caused oil prices to jump, 8% in just one day back on June 13th. That kind of volatility could easily lead to a 40–50% hike in shipping costs. That hits India's imports and exports directly. Big impact. Then there's the monsoon. Its progress has been uneven. That makes the agricultural inflation outlook really uncertain, affecting food prices directly for everyone. For UPSC, this highlights our economy's vulnerability. Geopolitical shocks, over-reliance on oil imports, the monsoon's unpredictability. The way forward involves, diversifying oil imports, boosting domestic food production, maybe using fiscal tools more actively, and definitely improving real-time inflation forecasting.
Okay, shifting from the economy to global security, a recent report suggests us we're entering a third nuclear age. Sounds pretty ominous. What exactly does that mean, and why should we be concerned? Right, experts talk about different phases. The first nuclear age was the Cold War, bipolar world, mutually assured destruction, MAD. The second age came after the Cold War, more optimism about disarmament, treaties, and so on. Now, apparently, we're entering this third nuclear age.
And this third nuclear age is quite different. It's seen as unpredictable, multipolar, and critically, this is a worrying part. There's a rising risk of the use of nuclear weapons, not just having them. The drivers are pretty stark when you look at them. Israel bombing Iran, challenging non-proliferation norms, China's aggressive buildup, maybe 600 warheads now, Russia's nuclear threats over Ukraine, moving tactical nukes to Belarus. Plus, all the major powers, US, Russia, UK, France, are modernizing their arsenals. There's a real shift, it seems, from deterrence being a stabilizer to deterrence being used to try and, change the status quo. That's dangerous.
Wow. So what does this new era mean for global security overall, and maybe more specifically for India's position in this volatile landscape?
It points to a serious erosion of the arms control structures we used to rely on, like the NPT, the New START Treaty, which expires in 2026 with nothing to replace it yet. You've got growing unpredictability, a dangerous return to nuclear brinkmanship. Globally, it means a higher risk of conflict. Regionally in South Asia, it could harden stances further. The way forward, it has to involve rebuilding global nuclear dialogue, crucially bringing China into serious arms control talks, strengthening the NPT's disarmament side, promoting no first-use policies. These are vital. India, I think, has a big role in advocating for multilateral, non-discriminatory disarmament.
Let's bring our focus back home now to something incredibly vital for India's future. Building an inclusive pension system. It sounds like we have quite a lot of work ahead of us there.
Yeah, the numbers are quite striking. India's pension assets are only about 17% of GDP. Compare that to, say, 80% in many developed economies. And maybe even more concerning, only about 12% of our workforce has formal pension coverage. That leaves the vast majority, roughly 85%, in the informal sector, largely outside the system. India's low rank in the Mercer CFA Pension Index really hammers this home.
Just to clarify, the formal sector means organized jobs with structured benefits. The informal sector is, well, unorganized, non-contractual work, which is huge in India. Current schemes like the National Pension System, NPS, and Atal Pension Yojana, APY, they're voluntary and only cover a fraction, really.
So why is this such a critical challenge for India right now? And what are the experts suggesting as a way forward?
Look, this is a monumental challenge. Without significant reform, future old-age poverty could genuinely soar, maybe to 30% by 2050. That would seriously hinder India's whole 2047 development vision. The problems are pretty clear. A fragmented system, very limited coverage, especially for informal workers. Lack of awareness is a big issue too, plus inadequate incentives, especially for private and gig workers. For UPSC, this clearly connects to intergenerational equity, ensuring dignity in aging for everyone, with the suggested path. A comprehensive, maybe three-tiered system, something like a universal flat-rate contributory scheme, then employer-based auto-enrollment for organized workers, and finally voluntary private savings with better tax breaks. Plus, leveraging fintech for outreach and targeted plans for gig workers, women, the rural poor. Pension literacy is key too.
Okay, from securing financial futures to ensuring scientific breakthroughs. There's been what's called a revolutionary change in how India's scientific institutions can actually buy the materials they need. Yeah, this is quite a big deal. A landmark decision now allows scientific institutions to bypass GM, that's the government e-marketplace, for their procurement. This reverses a rule from post-2020 that mandated all government purchases, including research stuff, go through GIM. The example used is simple, like common salt, sodium chloride. In a lab, tiny differences in purity can totally wreck an experiment. GM's focus on the lowest bidder often just ignored these critical quality needs.
Right. GM is designed for cost efficiency. It's a centralized platform. But in science, reproducibility is absolutely core. You need the exact same or equivalent materials to get valid, repeatable results. The previous GM mandate often, well, compromised that principle. Scientists were complaining quite a bit.
So what does this policy reversal actually mean for the quality and maybe even the speed of scientific research in India?
Oh, it's expected to have a dramatically positive impact. The old system, with its, let's be honest, bureaucratic hurdles, just wasn't suited for specialized fields like R&D. It forced this awkward quality versus cost trade-off that led to wasted money, failed experiments, frustration. So this change should enhance research quality, definitely boost reproducibility, and save scientists invaluable time. For UPSC, this highlights that classic tension, bureaucratic uniformity versus the flexibility needed for innovation. It's about respecting scientific judgment over administrative rules sometimes. The way forward now is to institutionalize these flexible rules, maybe build category-specific protocols, and really foster more collaboration between scientists and the bureaucracy.
Let's turn now to a very complex and I think sensitive issue. The future of Abujamad, that dense forest region in Chhattisgarh. Right. Abujamad is this dense, largely unsurveyed forest. It's home to the Abujamadiya tribes, classified as a particularly vulnerable tribal group, a PVTG. Tragically, it's also been known as a Maoist-liberated zone. Now, the Union Home Minister has pledged to clear the Maoists by March 2026, and there are development plans alongside this: roads, schools, even mining expansion.
And the core tension you see is that despite the Forest Rights Act of 2006, the habitat rights of the Abujamadiya people remain largely unrecognized on the ground. Places like Verwakat, which is sacred to the Gonds, are potentially at risk now because of mining proposals. This raises a really critical question. Will this liberation lead to genuine inclusive development, or could it lead to exploitation? And will indigenous voices actually be heard in the process?
That really is the crux of it, isn't it? Whether this liberation brings true upliftment for the people there, or if it inadvertently leads to them losing their identity, their land.
Yeah, exactly. It's a stark case of potential development versus displacement. Security operations, understandably focused on Maoists, can sometimes sideline tribal autonomy and rights, especially the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC. There's a real risk of cultural erosion, sacred sites being endangered by outside interests. For UPSC, this touches on internal security complexities, tribal rights, sustainable development, governance. It's all intertwined. The way forward has to involve recognizing habitat rights before major development starts, centering the Gram Sabhas, the village councils, as key decision-makers under the Peace Act. Promoting cooperative tribal enterprises, maybe creating cultural conservation zones, it needs a very sensitive approach.
Okay, from internal security challenges, let's look outwards now at bolstering international defense ties. India seems to be continuing its strategic partnerships quite actively. Yes, Exercise Shakti has just kicked off. This is a biennial, so once every 2 years, joint military exercise between the Indian and French armies. An Indian army contingent, specifically from the Jammu and Kashmir Rifles, has headed to France. The aims are pretty standard but important. Enhance coordination, strengthen ties, practice joint combat drills, this time in semi-urban terrain.
Yeah, and Exercise Shakti isn't isolated. It's a key part of India's really broad defense cooperation with France. This goes back to their strategic partnership signed way back in 1998. Besides Shakti for the Army, they also have Garuda for the Air Force and Varuna for the Navy. It shows a really robust, multifaceted defense relationship.
So, beyond just the military drills themselves, what's the broader strategic significance here?
Well, the impacts are quite significant. Diplomatically, obviously, it strengthens India-France ties. Strategically, it enhances India's readiness for diverse situations, peacekeeping, counterinsurgency, maybe even hybrid warfare scenarios. And operationally, it's invaluable learning. Both armies get insights into each other's doctrines and ways of working. For UPSC, this highlights how bilateral defense cooperation bolsters India's strategic autonomy. Looking ahead, maybe institutionalizing tri-service drills involving Army, Navy, and Air Force with France could be next. And expanding the scope to cover newer domains like cyber and space warfare seems logical too.
All right, finally, let's talk about the Agnipath scheme again. There's a crucial step the Home Ministry is taking now to support the ex-Agniveers after their service. Right, quick recap. Agnipath scheme, launched June 2022, recruits youth as Agniveers for 4 years, 75% exit afterwards without a pension. Now, the Union Home Ministry has officially taken on the job of coordinating and monitoring the post-service careers of these ex-Agniveers. They've set up a dedicated online portal for this, and importantly, announced a 10% reservation for them in the Central Armed Police Forces, CAPFs, like CISF, BSF, CRPF. The first batch of Agniveers exits in 2026, so this is timely.
The theme aims to make the armed forces younger, more tech-savvy. Ex-Agniveers are those who complete the 4 years but aren't retained for longer service. The Home Ministry's role now is essentially facilitating their transition back to civilian life.
So what does this move really mean for things like job security for these young people, their aspirations, and maybe the long-term success or perception of the Agnipath scheme itself?
Well, it directly addresses some of the core concerns raised when the scheme launched, particularly that issue of job insecurity after just 4 years, and worries about losing trained personnel. Remember the protests in 2022? A lot of that was about the lack of clear career guarantees. So this move might help channel skilled, disciplined youth into other uniformed services. But there's still a risk, isn't there, of creating a pool of trained but potentially underemployed youth if other avenues aren't sufficient. For UPSC, this touches on balancing national security, youth employment, social stability. The way forward really needs transparent career pathways via this new portal. Expanding reserved quotas beyond just CAPFs could be considered, and crucially providing good counseling and reskilling support aligned with civilian job market needs.
Okay, moving from the armed forces to our broader social fabric, there's this growing demand for a nationwide caste census, and the Congress Party is now urging the center to look at the Telangana model. Yes, the demand for a caste census is gaining momentum. The main arguments are around achieving greater social justice and enabling better, more targeted subcategorization for other backward classes, OBCs. We haven't had a full caste census since 1931. The Socioeconomic and Caste Census, SECC 2011, well, its caste data wasn't fully released or utilized. Now the Congress is pointing to Telangana's recent exercise as a model, calling it efficient and transparent.
Right, the Telangana model refers to that state's recent effort to collect comprehensive, inclusive caste data through a consultative process. It's being held up as a possible blueprint. The center has confirmed the next census is planned for 2027 and will include caste enumeration. But there are already some murmurs and concerns about whether funding allocated will be sufficient for such a massive exercise.
So what are the real core challenges here, and what are the potential implications if this goes forward comprehensively?
Well, the biggest challenge right now is the lack of reliable, updated caste data, which honestly hinders effective policy design and welfare targeting. That's the main argument for it. The challenges against it, or complicating it, include significant concerns about the potential politicization of caste data. And, as mentioned, the risk of underfunding a complex process. The potential impacts are huge, though. For social justice, better data could genuinely help refine OBC reservations and target welfare better. For governance, it enables more evidence-based policymaking. Politically, well, it's clearly become a major electoral issue. For UPSC, you're looking at the intersection of social justice, governance, data politics, electoral dynamics. The way forward probably needs a multi-stakeholder approach, definitely adequate funding, methodological rigor to ensure data quality, and importantly, safeguards against misuse or politicization. Public release of findings is also key for transparency.
And finally, let's wrap up our deep dive today with a significant update on India's strategic capabilities coming from the SecBI report.
Yeah, the latest report from SIPRI, that's the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, estimates India's nuclear arsenal increased to 180 warheads in 2024. That's up from 172 in 2023. The report also specifically mentions India developing new canisterized missiles. These can be transported with the warhead already mated, significantly boosting readiness and survivability. It notes both India and Pakistan are continuing nuclear modernization.
Right. SIPRI is a globally respected source for this kind of data. Canisterized missiles, basically stored in sealed tubes, are easier to move, hide, and launch quickly. That enhances survivability against a first strike and readiness. Globally, this comes as Russia, the U.S., China are all modernizing or expanding their forces, too. SIPRI itself explicitly warns about the danger of a new nuclear arms race escalating.
So what does this incremental increase in technological development mean for India's overall strategic posture and for stability in the region, given this evolving global backdrop?
It's a complex balancing act, really. On one hand, it undoubtedly boosts India's deterrence capability, particularly given the regional security environment. It signals credibility. On the other hand, any increase raises concerns for global disarmament advocates and potentially fuels regional arms competition dynamics. It also clearly shows India's advancing missile technology prowess. For UPSC, this connects to India's strategic autonomy, its nuclear doctrine, particularly credibility of deterrence, and its role in global arms control debates. The way forward likely involves maintaining strategic stability through careful, calibrated modernization, engaging in regional confidence-building measures, perhaps quiet diplomacy, or continuing to advocate for global nuclear arms reduction overall. Strong command and control remains paramount.
You know, what really stands out from this whole deep dive, I think, is just how interconnected all these seemingly separate issues are. From, local governance in Karnataka or Chhattisgarh right up to global nuclear strategy. Each one reflects this really complex interplay of policy, society, technology, and some pretty fundamental ethical questions.
Indeed. And getting a handle on these nuances, understanding the connections, it's crucial, not just for staying informed for an exam, but for recognizing the ripple effects these decisions today will have on our collective future. It really is about seeing the why behind the what.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. We genuinely hope this has given you some fresh perspectives and helped you connect a few more dots across the vital news stories shaping our world. If you found this valuable, please do remember to subscribe for daily updates. And drop a comment, share your thoughts with us. We'd love to hear them. Also, please join our Telegram channel. You'll find the link in the description. You can read the actual news articles we discussed today and even test yourself with a quiz based on them. Until next time, Jai Hind.